Welcome to my fourth video for our ActionRPG project inside of Unity. This is the second chapter where we're working on player attacks. And this video is going to focus on setting up player health and player mana, and then some graphic health bars to see that. And this one, we're doing this before we get to the player ranged attack because I want the player's ranged attack to be limited by how much mana they have. Just to kind of to give some balance between the melee attack, which you can always do, and the ranged attack, which is safe, but you get limited amounts of usage. So we're going to be using these UI bars found inside of the textures library that I've provided. So I guess before we even get to the coding of that, let's load in these graphics. So under textures, I want to make another folder. Create a folder called UI for user interface. So let's go and drag and drop UI bar, UI health bar, and UI bar mana. And while we're here, we'll bring in this white bar, even though that's going to be used for a extra video where we can charge up our ranged attack. So let's select these graphics and bring them into the UI folder. They are in there. They are correctly named. They are single file, and I actually don't feel the need to tweak any of these. The pixels per unit is not going to be super relevant because it's going to be on the UI layer, so I'm going to leave these as their default, and I'm not really going to change much, so I'm just going to leave those be. Well, maybe the white bar one I will, however, change to have the point filtering. Okay, so we've loaded those bars in, and now we're going to have to start setting up player health. I'm going to do the UI last once I get these health variables and all that stuff established. So inside of my scripts for scriptable objects, because I want player health to persist between levels, I need to store it in a way that it retains its data. And we did that with our exit vector, which was definitely a complicated concept. But the idea is that I actually have different players on different levels. So inside of my cave, this is a different player prefab. And so there's not, I can't store the health on the player because the actual player object changes depending on the scene. So if I'm in the south overworld, I get this. If I'm in the east overworld, I get this. So these are all different players. So I need a data type or data structure to hold this in between levels. And that's where the scriptable objects come in. Because the scriptable object, if we can find it, will retain this data for as long as the game is running, and even technically after the game is running, if it's still in memory. In the Unity editor, it will be. So inside of the scriptable objects script folder, let's create a new script. And I'm going to call this int value, so integer value. I like how it opens that when I push enter, but doesn't actually open the script. So I'm going to double click int value to get it to load here. I am going to steal some of my code from my exit vector value, because I don't want to have to type, and a lot of this is actually very similar. So I'm going to just take this, copy, go over here and paste it. Remembering that I need to bring back the class name. So this class name needs to be int value, and this name is going to be integer value for my menu item. But I don't want this, I don't need the scene transition stuff. And instead of a vector 2 being stored, I just want to store an integer. And let's change this from spawning position to current value. And let's see. we're going to create another one here. This one's going to be called max value. And we'll have another one called default max value. And so the on after deserialize, we're going to set the maximum health. So max value is going to be set equal to the default max. So like every time we load the game, it's going to reset my max back to what the game thinks should be the max. And then the current value is going to be set equal to the max value. And so that you're starting at full health, or full mana, depending. So this is all we need to do for this int value script. So I'm going to save it, and I'm going to create my scriptable objects right now, because I'm going to start coding the player script to use these. Unity's going to take a second as it recompiles that. And we're ready to make a few new scriptable objects. So I'm going to create, right-click, scriptable objects folder. I'm going to go to create my scriptable objects, and I'm going to choose an integer value. I'm going to call this player health, and I'm going to create another one called player mana. So the player mana default, we can go with 100, and player health default will be 100. And you can see those values changing instantaneously. All right, so we got those set up. Now we've got to go back into the player script to kind of prepare all of this, and to prepare for us setting all of it up. So I guess let's see. Put it towards the top. Health and mana. And UI. So the things that we need here, we need to kind of create a container to hold that, and I'm going to call it an int value, because that's the name of the data type we've made, health, and another public int value, mana. So essentially this means that my health two variables that we kind of care about, which will be health dot current value and health dot max value. That's going to be how we're going to interact with our health inside of my code by using this type of object. Additionally, let's see, we probably need to set up where we're going to find the health and mana bar. So we're going to create a private image. Now image, it's not going to autocomplete, and that's because we need to import a piece of the Unity engine. Import Unity engine.ui, and now you can see image changed colors. We want to have a health bar, and we're going to have a private image mana bar, so that we can link those. We can grab we can find the UI and such. Okay. So we just added these 4 variables, which is going to represent all of my health. Going to the start, let's begin searching for our health and mana bars. So health bar is going to be set equal to get capital G game object, which is a set of static commands. Find health bar dot get component image. So it's going to search the entire hierarchy. It's going to search this over here for anything named health bar exactly like that. And so we're finding it based on the name, rather than linking it by dragging it into the prefab, and that's because the user interface is going to be different on each map. So I can't rely on it always being the same thing to link. I actually have to search for the user interface so the player knows what to link to be the health bar. And we're going to do the same thing for mana. And so we're going to search for that and attach those. Let's write a method to update both of them. We'll call this update UI. Let's make it capital since I've... There. And so update UI is going to redraw so it's going to redraw the health and mana bars if one of them has changed. Now, that could lead us to some ideas of maybe instead of having it like this, we could have a method that changes it and then updates it. But I think it's actually probably easier if we just call update UI anytime we interact with health and mana. So if health bar is not equal to null, then health bar dot fill amount is going to be set equal to float health current value divided by health max value. So because these two things are integers, current value and max value are integers, we have to cast them to be a float because fill amount is a percentage amount for how much of this bar should be filled in graphically. So if you have 100% health, full health, fill amount's going to be 1. If you have 0 health, fill amount's going to be 0. If mana bar is not equal to null, and then we're going to do the same thing. Mana bar dot fill amount is going to be equal to the current amount of mana divided by the max amount. Now we could add some code here if we really wanted to get fancy about like if this thing is null that we could try to search to find the new one. So if you wanted to be extra concerned about like this accidentally breaking, we could add commands like this. So like let's say maybe for whatever reason the UI wasn't in the scene when this start gets called. Anytime we try to redraw it, if it failed to link, then it will link it. So that could be a good fail-safe to make sure that the UI is always found. This actually would not affect performance in any way. So this is a little bit more complex code. It just, if for whatever reason, if those happen to get lost or it lost track of them, then we can do that. Okay, so we're updating my UI. I still need to make my UI. So we'll hit save. And I do really want to be able to test it. So inside of update, I'm going to add a quick thing, input.getKey up. Let's just test, I don't know, R. And then we're going to take some health away. Health dot current value minus equals 5. So if I push R, it's gonna cause some damage. I'm gonna delete this later, but I just want to be able to check to make sure that I've correctly attached the two things. Hit save. Now I've got to make my UI inside of the game, and then I'm going to attach my things. So we return here. Scripts compile. Open up our player prefab, and let's link these scriptable objects into health and mana. So player health, linking here, and player mana, linking here. So those will now be in all of the copies of the prefab of the player. So whatever scene we go to, it's going to find those. Okay. I just realized we'll have to go back to the code later. Let's begin making our UI. So let's go to game object, UI, and I want to add an image. So I'm going to pick image. And it kind of begins with making our giant canvas like that. And that's actually just a fraction of the canvas. The canvas is that big. So whenever I'm working with the UI, I really do not like to deal with it on the game layer. So I'm sorry, the scene. I switch over to game, and you can see that that's where that square is trying to appear. So what we want here is I'm going to call this, instead of image, health bar back, and let's give it the source image. Go to UI, and it's going to be health bar. Boom. Now that's uglily stretched. I don't think that's a word. But let's set the size to match this pixel size. So my health bar is 36 pixels by 38 pixels. So I'm going to change that here. The height is 136, and the width, oops, I have that backwards. 136 is the width, and the height is 38. And so that looks a little bit more what it's supposed to. However, it's in the wrong spot. So I want to position it. I want to kind of anchor it up in the top of the screen. So if I left click on this, on the rectangle transform, and then I hold down Shift and Alt, I can force it to jump up here. And so now we've got it in a reasonable position. We could probably bump it in just a tiny bit. Let's go in 20 pixels and down 20 pixels. So that's going to be where my health bar resides. Right click, and let's add a UI object, another image. Now, I right clicked on my health bar back to make it a child. If you didn't, we can just drag it there. Let's call this health bar. Remember, this name matters a lot because this is the name it is searching for. If yours wasn't properly childed, you can just drag this health bar so that it's a child of the health bar back. And let's attach its image. UI health bar, going into source image. And this one is 200 by 28, so the width is 200 and the height is 28. And if we get really kind of close up to it, you can actually see that it needs to come down a little bit. I can see some of the gray under there. So it needs to have a Y position of -1. And then that fits better. And I'm fine with it being centered because now it's centered on wherever this thing is. So if this moves around, then the other bar comes with it. The health bar, the last thing we need to make sure we have set is the image type. Instead of simple, we want to do filled. And I don't want to do radial, I want to do a horizontal fill. And that looks kind of like what I'd want a health bar to do. So left fill origin. All right, that's all we really need to do here. Now let's move on to doing the mana bar. So we could just right click and duplicate this, the health bar back, and now I have another health bar back, but I'm going to rename that to mana bar back. I'm going to change its position here. Let's go for a -60, so it's right under here. And I don't need to change that, but let's rename bar under it from health bar to mana bar, and then change its graphic to be the blue bar. And so now I kind of have my system here. We're almost done. So we can hit play, and we can see that we aren't getting any errors. I don't have anything that interacts. If I press R, nothing's happening. And we also see that we don't have a health, like a UI system down there. So we need to, ooh, we got a null reference exception. This. Oh, that was probably on the other one. It failed to find one. And so when it ran the get component.image, there was no health bar. And so we end up getting this crash. Well, as much of a crash as we can get. All right. So that leads me to kind of ponder for a second here. How I want to kind of address this. And first off, I'm not actually, this isn't updating, and that's actually because I'm not telling it to update the UI every time I take my damage. So that's actually why when I was pushing R, I wasn't seeing it change. So if I hit save and I go back in now, when I push R, my health should drop. We don't have the player dying yet. We're going to handle player death and animation for that once we start putting monsters in. And negative health, again, not going to worry about that. Mana we'll test in the next video because we're going to be doing a ranged attack in the next video. But that works. But we still end up getting this error when I walk off the screen because I didn't have my bar set. And actually, if we notice, it's not transitioning me correctly. It's putting me in this default location because the script breaks when that happens. So, and when the script breaks, if it crashes here, it never gets to set up the player location, so the player gets stuck in the default spot. All right, so I guess we could try to make this a little bit more error-proof. And actually, let's see. We can search for it first, and then if health bar isn't null, we can then go through and, ooh. Health bar search. And then we can link it. So that way we can be a little bit more safe with how we do this. And while this does look like, you know, this is way more code, and we could have skipped this going under the assumption that we're never going to have this error. And I guess that's up to the programmer. Like, how many layers of error protection do you want? Like, in this case, this is being super cautious because I'm grabbing it first, then I'm making sure it's not null, and then I'm assigning the image component to it. Which kind of makes me think I need to do that for this. But what you'll notice, though, is when I actually run it, then I walk off the bottom, I'm not getting that error anymore because it's not trying to find it. Now this gets the error. I was pushing R, and that's because these ones weren't the better way under here when it attempts to find it, but it's going to fail to. So we can actually take this and replace this single line with it. And that's kind of the cost with searching for things rather than like linking them directly to the prefab. Now I can be guaranteed I'm not going to crash pretty much under any circumstances. And then right after this, let's call update UI. Because if I walk into the map with missing health, I should probably update the UI for that. Which then leads me to think I can probably just get rid of these, because I'm going to get them defined here anyway. And so we've got our update UI happening during my start method, and then it also happens any other time my health would change. So here's our finished update UI component. So the update UI component not only finds the bars, but then updates them. And it always checks to see if those bars exist. And now as far as getting this UI into everything else, what I'm going to do for that is actually going to turn it into a prefab. So I'm going to take my canvas, and I'm going to put it into my core prefabs. So I'm going to make canvas, and I'm going to bring it down here into the core. Okay. Then we can go put this in other scenes. So I'm going to save this scene, but then I'm going to go to my cave. I'm going to take my canvas and just drop it in there. I'm going to save this. I'm going to go to my overworld east, and I'm going to put my canvas in there. And I'm going to hit save. And then I'm going to go to overworld south, and I am going to drop my canvas in there. So this makes actually adding the UI to a level very easy, and all we have to do is drag and drop that prefab. And even better, if we make any changes to it, we just make changes to the prefab and it will change all of my UIs everywhere. So that should work out very conveniently. So when we hit play, if I have some health damage, and I walk down here to the south, we can see that this bar immediately updates with a new health damage value. And it's updating here. So no matter which screen I go to, it's refreshing my health to be the correct value when I enter. And it is tracking my health across all the screens. And just to kind of give a little bit of foreshadowing, this is going to be a similar system to if we want to track player keys or items or pickups, or even like the player stats. Like if you want to have level and just different buffs on the player, you would actually do a system similar to this, where we're storing it as a scriptable object, but then pulling it back in with the code. And so that pretty much wraps this up. There might be one little thing I want to do real quick though. And that is take out this. We don't need to test my health anymore. But I'll leave it, I'll just comment it out. I did want to start moving my cooldown stuff to a method, because this update method is going to become very congested kind of quickly. And so we might want to start considering branching some of this out to make this easier to read. And so like, for example, my cooldown update here, I think I can turn that into a method called like update cooldowns. And I'm just going to cut this and make a new method wherever I want to, called public void capital update cooldowns. And I can put that inside of there. And the convenient thing about that is I can just minimize this function. And it can help clean up my update a little bit. So now we only have this here. So that might be something I'll further explore in an optional video towards the end of this, where I'll go through and actually try to make update as cleaned up as we can before we move on to adding enemies. So thank you for watching, and good luck getting your UI looking good.